Yes, it's come to this. Was this my punishment for being somewhat lax in my reviews this year? The fact that I skipped a few weeks angered the gaming review gods, and now I must atone for my sins? If that's the case, may I never anger those fictitious gods again, because this game was a hell that no man should ever be forced to endure. If you haven't heard of Ride to Hell Retribution, I would be a bit shocked. It's pretty much touted as one of the worst games ever made. Yes, even worse than this one, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Wow, that's quite an honor. In fact, according to most websites that review games that I've ever seen, they consistently consider it one of the worst of the worst. But I guess I shouldn't just keep droning on. Let's get this review going. To kick off such a shitty game, I decided to revamp my intro. Hope you like it, and special thanks goes out to Iller J for the song. All his info's in the description, and I put it in the credits too. Thanks man, you rock. So yeah, Ride to Hell Retribution. I suppose I may as well start with the story, which is strangely one of the stronger points of the game. You play as a man named Jake, who just returned from the Vietnam War. He meets up with his Uncle Mac and his little brother Mike. Mike throws a hissy fit because he wants to go see a band, and Mac orders Jake to go follow him to make sure he's okay. This is officially the first mission of the game, and I'll get to that in a bit because there's already some issues here. Once you do catch up with Mikey, they have a little chat. Jake goes to get him a burger, and then when he emerges, they are fighting another biker gang who happens to not like them because they recognize the patch on their jackets. They slit Mike's throat, and instead of going into a rage and killing them all right then and there, Jake just falls to his knees and awkwardly cries out. No! Strangely, the enemy gang doesn't do anything about Jake other than shooting him. Instead, they just walk away and, don't make sure he's actually dead. So then Jake sets out to murder all involved with his brother's death a few days after he gets shot. The strange thing about this is that the game starts with a hodgepodge of cutscenes and disjointed gameplay scenes that are trying to show you what you're in for. And if I was smart, I would have shut it off at this point. First off, Jake is shown simply driving down a road, and then it goes to a scene where he's mounting a machine gun and blasting enemy thugs. Though, a minute or two later, the game fades away to another scene, and then into a fighting area where you're simply doing quick time events in a beatdown. Get used to this, by the way, as there are so many quick time events that even God of War and Resident Evil 6 are saying, dude, that's too many. After about a minute of this fight, you're thrown into yet another scene, and then the game's intro, if you want to call it that, wraps up and you're thrown into the actual game. If you haven't shut the game off after this crappy intro sequence, then maybe you will when you play the first level and see just how god-awful this piece of dookie is. The first mission is just to chase Mike down the road on your bike. But where do I start? How about I explain the different mission types, as there's 3 different styles of gameplay. That will allow me to go into depth on the problems each one provides. And yeah, there's not really much that's positive about this game, but I'll try to give credit where credit is due, in those rare opportunities. The first you encounter is the driving. You just cruise down a very linear road on your chopper. Sometimes you simply need to reach the end and avoid objects. Other times, you might have enemies chasing you. There's also a few races that you'll have to partake in. But where do I start? Well, the racing portion is simple because it's just normally a point A to point B drive while beating your opponent to the finish line, of which you'll never see because the game enjoys just fading out at a somewhat random point to signify the end of a race. And you won't know if you won until the game fades, because if you can't see your opponent, you won't know if you're ahead or not because there's no identifier on your position. Granted, there are 2 official races around a track that you'll need to play, and they're given a lap and position counter, so why the hell isn't it shown in these illegal street races, of which you normally face just one opponent? Was it really freaking hard to code something like that in? Apparently, because even for those 2 races I just mentioned, both are the same track, except the second is the reversed route. That's just fucking lazy. There are some timed missions as well, and a lot of times, this timer is very stingy. Sure, if you don't mess up, there's plenty of leeway, but the game enjoys making you think that you're failing even if you're doing well. I'll get to why soon. When there's combat involved, the game reacts differently depending on whether you need to use a firearm or not. If not, enemies will suddenly appear next to you, even if it requires them from going from a dead stop to max speed within a second. You'll see a quick time event pop up, and you just need to mash the shown button a few times to beat the enemy off their bike. Rinse and repeat. If you need to shoot at your enemies, the game will actually be nice and slowed down, allowing you to attempt to properly aim and fire at your opponents with unlimited ammo. How nice of them! Regardless of whether you shoot or punch your enemies off their bikes, once they dismount, no matter what, the enemy bike explodes. Every freaking time. It just feels like a bad action movie, and that theme stays true throughout the entire game. At least, I felt it did. The biggest obstacle isn't your enemy bikers, the cops, or even the timer. It's your own damn bike. It controls like you're constantly driving on a slab of ice. Just nudging the analog stick in a direction slides you across the road. There's no real way to simply slide a foot or two in a direction. It's always a drastic wheel turn. Now, this is bad enough, but let me say one thing. No reverse option. Yep, this is yet another game where the developers thought a reverse control would be unnecessary, so they opted instead to give us another way of getting away from crashes. Respawns. So here's how this works. Let's say you're driving at max speed and smash into a concrete barrier, and it'll happen. Instead of simply backing up and driving around it, instead there's two options. You might simply rebound off at an impossible angle, although Jake will always maintain control and never fall off. The more common option, though, is that the screen will fade and Jake will resume control of his bike a small distance prior to his crash point. I have no words! Why in the hell did they think that this is a good idea? Okay, I can actually answer my own question. With no reverse, this prevents the player from having to just drive backwards, so rearrange yourself to avoid the obstacle you inadvertently smashed into. Secondly, it allows the game to attempt to maintain momentum and a sense of speed. This wouldn't be a bad choice when looking at it this way, but there's another issue. The game doesn't always wait for you to hit a dead stop before respawning you. There are many times where you might just rub up against a barrier or a down tree or something, but man, if you don't keep going at that max speed, this game is going to take it that you need some help, fade out, and push you back a ways. This can be extremely frustrating again, especially in timed missions or ones where you're forced to be chasing someone. I can see why they went with this idea, but it's done horribly. And before I move on to the power sliding and other quote-unquote stunts that you can perform when you're on your bike, I just want to say that the driving and ride to hell really reminds me of a shitty Road Rash clone. Remember Road Rash? I reviewed the third game years ago and I really enjoyed it. It's the same idea as driving from point A to B, beating your opponents off their bikes with fists and other melee weapons, no reversing, no open world option. But Road Rash was a great game. This one, yeah, not so much. Anyway, let me move on to those stunts I just mentioned. The only real forced one is the power sliding, done by pressing triangle. There are some areas where you must slide your bike impossibly underneath things like down trees, tankers, and the such. But you can also hold down triangle and power slide literally everywhere. Oh, and you maintain your speed. And not fall off. And if you have a fellow rider, they won't fall off either. And you can turn ever so slightly. And if you smack something, you still get credit for the power slide. Again, no words. The other stunts are jumps and wheelies. Yeah, I know. Big stunts, right? Jumps are simply graded on how much distance you get off them. You don't have a lot of control over this, other than a few late game missions where you do get to get some decent air. Wheelies can be done at will just by holding down while you drive. Again, you're graded on distance. If you're gunning for all the trophies, like I am, you need to perform 10 S-grade wheelies in the game. This isn't easy because, well, you're never really given enough room to do the wheelie because there's always too much shit in the way. And that leads me back into the first official mission of the game. You're chasing Mikey while avoiding a shit ton of construction on the highway, all while driving in the middle of the night and not really able to see what you're driving around. Even when the brightness option is turned up on your TV, you still can't see shit. This is because in areas of less light, it seems like the developers intentionally turned down the light levels. You can see this in other areas, not just the nighttime driving scenes. You can be running around in daylight, and then when entering a tunnel or darker building, you can visibly see the light levels drop to nearly nothing. It makes no freaking sense. You would think that the headlights would help, That'd be a huge nope. It exists, sure, but it doesn't do shit. The game just enjoys to make you crash into objects when you can't see them, then piss you off further because it respawns you back a ways. And then you fail the mission because you're driving more aggressively and crash into even more objects that you can't fucking see. And I may as well touch on the graphics while I'm talking about not being able to see crap. The graphics are just plain awful. The stuff you're viewing when you're close isn't so bad, but when viewing the environment, especially the stuff in the distance, it's just a blurry mess of pixels. It looks like a late PS2 game at times in quality, which is just plain sad considering the game is using the Unreal Engine. It's also a shame that all the character models look identical in shape. Every character seems to be the same height, with only minor alterations to their weight. All the women look the same, and you'll see multiple prostitutes that look like ones earlier encountered, but although it's never outright said, I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be completely different, as they don't show any sort of indication that they recognize their hero. Or maybe they do and prefer not to mention anything. And how about the slowdown? Only noticed it in one mission, I think like the third or fourth one, and unfortunately I didn't get the worst offenders on video, but the game does slow down to a freaking crawl at times, and then of course the frame rate suffers because of it. I thought Stranglehold was bad. This game takes first place in the most modern game I've played with the worst slowdown, when only a few things are on screen. Thankfully, I've only ever noticed it once, and as I said, I didn't get it on video. But it does exist in lower forms later in the game. And just like I said in Stranglehold, it's just plain pathetic. Another oddity is that the spike strips function a bit differently than you would think. Instead of just popping your tires and making your steering harder, instead the spike strips do immediate damage to Jake. I don't even know what to say about this. How do spike strips do damage to the rider? And a lot of damage. It's more than being blasted by a few bullets. Like 3 of these and you're freaking dead. Just how? In addition, if you do take too much damage, you'll see the screen turn gray, resembling Uncharted's way of measuring health. If you do take a lot of damage and then smack into something, you might respawn, and then explode. Why is the respawning necessary? Why not do an immediate explode? It's like the developers purposely tried to think, what could be the most illogical way of doing this event? In loading screens, you're also told about something called a tuck boost. Both myself and my friend Will, who I forced to play this game with me, had no freaking clue what this was, until I found out when recording all this footage that if you hold up on the analog stick, you'll get a freaking turbo boost. Well shit, this is never told to us on those damn tooltips. Granted, I never went through the tutorial option that you're given on the pause menu, but still, it would have been nice just to say, use tuck boost to get past difficult spots by pressing the analog stick up. Is that really so freaking difficult to add those few words? Or even better, make the tutorial an option on the main menu from when you originally start the game? Don't make me start a game up and then give it as a possible option that I might not see till a couple hours later. Okay, let's move on to the brawler segments before I completely lose my sanity. Or I guess I could wrap up the shooting parts in here as well. Same difference, really. The game turns into a third-person shooter affair, with your choice between your fists or guns. But where do I start with this? I guess in the fist fights. You have 3 commands available to you. Triangle is your block/counter option. Square throws a kick, which breaks any kind of defense your opponent might have up. X throws a punch, or swings the weapon you're carrying. Seems a bit backwards if you ask me. I'm fine with triangle doing the defensive moves, but personally I think square as a punch feels more natural than X. But hey, that's me. As you're fighting, you'll see 2 icons that might spring up. Triangle will do your typical counter, which is performed if you can press the button when it pops up in time. But the other thing you might see is a circle icon, which signifies a rage attack. This causes Jake to give out a laughter-inducing shout, and then a series of quick-time events performed in time to the beatdown he gives the enemy. Once this is completed, the enemy is dropped immediately. These rage attacks function as instant kills, which are nice if you don't mind doing QTEs all the frickin' time. Personally, I don't mind them on occasion, but this game goes overboard, and as such, I tended to eventually ignore the rage attacks and just continue my simple button mashing. As for when the rage attacks are available, who the hell knows? I felt like they just popped up at random, as there's no gauge anywhere to give any sign of a build-up or anything. In addition, you can unlock some combos, but let's face it, in a crappy game like Ride to Hell, they're really not needed. In fact, the only time I really used them was when you're fighting in an underground ring, trying to hunt down one of the guys responsible for Mikey's demise. The game basically becomes a shoddy boxing tournament, where you have to take down, I think it was 4 guys in a row. Not difficult by any stretch. but the combos do help break up the monotony by pressing square then X a few times. Here I was able to go all out and alternate square and X for combos. Wow, what a feature! I don't really have much else to say about the fighting, other than just reiterating that it's just plain boring. So let's move on to the shooting. Something that should be fun, but even Ride to Hell manages to fuck that up. You're first introduced to firearms by talking to some guy that good old Uncle Mac set you up with, but he won't give you a gun until you prove you can fight and shoot. So you get to crushing the skulls of 2 soldiers, for some reason, and then are escorted slowly to a firing lane, where you have 3 tests to prove that you know how to fire a weapon. First you try a pistol, then a rifle, then an SMG. Here, before you even get to pop skulls with your bullets, you'll start seeing some of the flaws with the shooting. 1, the SMG has some of the worst recoil ever. You'd think rifles would kick a little bit harder, but not today, folks. That SMG is going to be a hell of a test because you might have to aim low and fire multiple bullets, just so that the recoil carries the subsequent rounds into their homes. Second, and the most notable one you'll notice here, is that the aiming reticule doesn't move too smoothly. Add in the fact that when aiming, Jake moves with the cursor, even when he's just moving the right analog stick, and you might have some tough times on this seemingly basic mission. Here's another catch with this objective. You are forced to get at least a C on all 3 weapons before the game lets you pass and move on. If you fail any of these, you are forced to start again at the pistol. That's right, the good old vet that hooks you up won't give you a second chance on SMG if you ace the pistol and rifle. If you fail any of the 3, you start back at the beginning. What a bunch of shit! So how well does that shooting range prepare you from the army of hoodlums that you'll have to face? Well, not much of course. Thankfully, the enemy AI is often pretty freaking stupid. Sure, they'll use cover a bit, but Jake is a bullet sponge and it's not often that you'll be forced to hide yourself. Most of the times, you can simply walk up to an enemy shooter and pop him a few times. You'll definitely want to go for headshots though, as it's the most reliable way to take down your enemies. Body shots just don't seem to do a lot of damage, at least not until you're able to buy the better weapons. Unless you're fighting one of these Jason mask wearing bastards though. These guys, they just don't go down. I mean, look at this. At times, I tested it to see if maybe kicking the guy in the balls 100 times would speed up his death. The answer to that, in case you're wondering, is a big, resounding no. It doesn't. Explosions are the way to go, but you don't get dynamite, this game's version of a grenade, until halfway through the game. Halfway! So if you see any kind of explosive barrel, use that to take out the not Jasons. Just make sure you stay clear because that explosion it creates is deceiving. It will do a lot more damage than it looks like. And I've accidentally blown myself up a few times because I wasn't far enough away. And with the lengthy loading times you're forced to sit through, you want to limit the amount of deaths you get. Now, I mentioned the stupid AI, and that brings me to what I eventually started doing in the final levels of the game. Saying fuck the melee combat. If I had enough ammo, I would literally just watch as the fist fighters would run at me, and I'd just shoot them in the head. Combat over. Sure, it's not as satisfying, even though every headshot slows down the game for a second, to emphasize your amazing ability to aim in this game. I would normally want to be able to fight enemies. I've been playing Sleeping Dogs at the same time I've been playing this, and that game is a hell of a lot more fun mixing up melee fighting and firearms. Sleeping Dogs does it right, but Ride to Hell is just a boring mess. So back to my point. The game allows you to shoot at enemies meant to be punched, and even vice versa if you get too close and can't aim right, which can definitely happen. Speaking of, how about your hip fire? Don't do it. Just fucking don't. Most games, when you fire from the hip, that is, without bringing up the aiming reticule, the game fires from the center of the screen. It makes sense, right? Well, of course that's not the case in Ride to Hell. Here, the game fires to the left of the screen. What? Yeah, I don't get myself, but I felt like when I was trying to panic fire, you have to aim to the left middle side of the playfield. When I learned this, I just stopped hip firing. I had a better chance of hitting my target by backpedaling, aiming, and even taking a punch or two while aiming for the head. This just frustrated me even more. How can a game mess up so much at once? Were they trying to make one of the worst games ever frickin' made? You can also take cover from shots, but it doesn't always help. Most low barriers will still expose a part of your head, so you can think that you're safe, but enemies can still shoot you and eventually kill you. So if you do want to take cover, try to find a higher barrier that completely hides your body. Otherwise, it's a crapshoot on whether it's true cover or not. Another problem you'll run into is the camera. It controls like you would expect, but it feels like it gets stuck at times, almost like an N64 game. You'll constantly be fighting it in the narrower areas, as you'll be trying to beat up someone, and then go for a counter, but then as the camera shifts to attempt to focus on it, you'll see nothing but pixelated wall. If you're lucky. It happens often, and it's even worse when you're trying to shoot enemies and the camera just keeps shifting, preventing you from being able to get a bullet to strike. It's just frustrating overall. There is one thing that helps to save this game's on-foot segments: the environmental attacks. At times, you'll see this blue icon. If you can get an enemy thug close to it, you can press square when the icon shows to immediately dispatch that enemy by slamming them into that object. But like everything else in Ride to Hell, this fun little attack burns out quickly. For one, animations are limited. See this car? Wouldn't it be sweet if you smashed the enemy's head through a window or something? No, you just do the same thing you would do with a table and smack their head on the hood a few times. What a fucking letdown! And secondly, for some unknown reason, environmental attacks can only be used once per area. Once. So that table that doesn't break when you smash someone's head on it? Yeah, once was enough. I'm sorry, that's just inexcusable. Make the fucking thing break if you don't want people using it a few times. But what about this hole? I can only throw one person down there? What is the reasoning behind this? What is the reasoning? Apparently Ride to Hell thinks you're a moron too, because it's constantly bringing up tips on the bottom of the screen for the more basic of things, like how to power slide when riding, or how to take cover when, well, near cover. Not to mention if you can't throw a punch for whatever reason, it'll tell you, press square X to throw an attack. Yes, by the end of the game, I do know how to fucking take cover, you idiots. And no, there's no option to turn these off either. So, let's see. We got the gameplay pretty much down now. I talked about the horrible driving, subpar fisticuffs, and workable shooting. But I'm far from done. Let me talk about the hub town, drugs, and your upgrades. I'll start by saying that after a few missions, you'll notice that the enemies you kill will drop up to 3 things. They can potentially drop a weapon, or just possibly ammo. They might drop cold hard cash, and they might drop drugs. Keep in mind, the thugs aren't the only ones that are dropping drugs. The power plant workers that you must kill in some drawn out scene where you're trying to get around an electric fence all drop drugs. The cops you're forced to down while doing some rooftop running drop drugs. Are they drugs they picked up as evidence against someone they arrested? Somehow I doubt it. All the cops in this game are apparently corrupted. Every single one. At least that's how it works in my head. I got nothing against cops in real life. I got something against police in this freaking game. Then again, I got something against this whole game, and that something becomes more and more rage and frustration the more I play it. But anyway, back to the point. Jake needs to pick up these drugs because when he reaches the hub city, aka his hometown, aka Dead End, and yes, that's a freaking name, he gets to sell off these drugs to some hippie. It's an easy way to gain some much needed cash. This cash is then used to go see a man that is the gun dealer sent out for you. And here you can upgrade Jake's skills and weaponry. You can choose from one of 3 pistols, rifles, shotguns, and SMGs. You can eventually buy dynamite and an RPG. But there's also 2 pages where you can upgrade Jake's fighting skills. This gives him stuff like being able to throw your melee weapons, more effective counters, and fighting combos. This is one of the first things I unlocked, thinking that it would help a lot. But when you get down to it, it doesn't. And was truthfully a waste of money. But because I'm a trophy whore, I bought everything because achievements. There's also no reason to buy the middle weapons. When possible, just buy the best stuff. The guns you start with suck ass and barely do any damage. And truthfully, I didn't really try out the mid-range stuff. Just go for the best. Seriously, it's not that much more expensive. One of the strange things with these shop menus is that you have to press the confirm button when you exit. You can buy everything, but God help you if you press circle to exit instead of square. I can see that this would bypass the need to code a separate confirmation box every time you attempt to buy something. But this confuses me when you're selling the drugs. Not to mention that you can choose to sell each individually or sell all. There's no real need to hold on to them. Couldn't we have just gone away with the sell all option, that's it? Maybe talk to the hippie and a box pops up that says, "Do you want to sell your shit?" That would have been simple and effective. At least the coupon descriptions that show when you sell the drugs made me smile a bit. Mail order drugs before the dark web. Interesting. And with all this drug talk, just remember, drugs are bad, okay? There's 2 other options that you have in Dead End. You have a mission board that you can use to continue the game or replay missions. Yeah, if you feel you want to replay one of these missions, you can do so. I'll get to the collectibles later, which, in my opinion, is the only reason you would want to visit a past objective. But what I want to talk about first is the garage. This is one of the best features of the game, a way to customize your bike. Before you say, sweet, I say that it's one of the best features, but that's not saying much considering the game it's rooted to. You get a chance to apply stickers, change the paint scheme, switch out parts, or even choose a new bike. If you choose a new bike style, you cannot customize it. and these designs are pretty fugly. As for the customization, there's a fair amount of things you can choose from. Everything is just cosmetic though, and you never get any ability to increase your motorcycle's performance. And let's face it, the only place you'll really notice the different look is in Dead End. When you're driving, you're going to be focusing all your attention on avoiding any and all obstacles in your path. You're not going to be looking at which headlight you have attached. That's just not how our brains think. At least, it's not how mine works. And before I move on to Dead End itself, you might notice that when switching parts that there are some extreme lag when loading textures. There's a problem that occurs throughout the entire game. Let's compare it to another game, Rage. Yeah, the game had a small problem loading textures right away, but they come into focus a split screen after you stop. Yes, it's a little noticeable, but it's not something that you really think about constantly because you're constantly moving and it's only viewable when standing still. But fast forward back to the present. Ride the Hell has some of the worst texture lag I have ever seen. Cutscenes will be half over by the time the textures finally load in. Changing parts on your bike take much longer than they need to because when you select one to preview it, you have to let it load in. It's a very common problem in this game, and one that you'll keep noticing time and time again. How is this even possible? I've played many games that utilize the Unreal Engine. Now, I don't know jack about game design, but I would assume that if there was a problem with the engine, that every one of those games would have the same issue. But I don't recall any that have it this seriously, which brings me back to my theory that there is some piss-poor game design in Ride to Hell. But back to Dead End. It's cool to have an open level that you can use to upgrade Jake's abilities, but the stage feels way too open and empty. There's only a few pedestrians that you can see walking around, and it makes the town feel like a ghost town. Personally, I would have preferred a smaller town with maybe one street with minimal traveling to this openness. Or hell, even a simple menu after every chapter would have been desired. But instead, we get an empty town with few choices. At least there was some sort of ambition shown, so I'll give them credit for that. Speaking of openness, that's how most of the shooting stages feel. You get a large area with only a small handful of thugs to blast. You'll begin exploring every nook and cranny, but realize most of them don't go anywhere. So, as I did, I printed out a guide to show where all the collectibles were, so I didn't waste my time exploring boring locations that lack any sort of real detail. Again, there was some promise in these areas, but they just dragged on and on without showing any sort of different designs, so everything just runs together. Not to mention many of the areas just drag on forever. This brings me to the stage lengths and checkpoints. Both are inconsistent. Most bike driving levels don't include checkpoints and force you to complete it all in a single life. If you fail, you simply start from the beginning. But missions on foot can be either a few minutes in length, or what feels like an hour. The junkyard level and airplane graveyard come to mind. You shoot a few enemies, then enter a door. Once you get to a point that feels like the end of the stage, nope, you got about another 409 repetitive areas to shoot through. And if you die, checkpoints are usually in logical spots, but there are times you'll have to enter separate rooms thinking there was a checkpoint, fill your objective, and be forced to start all over. Bullshit. The game does allow you to press L3 in order to bring up an objective marker. But like every other thing in this fucking game, this doesn't function in the way it's supposed to. Or maybe it is supposed to deliberately mislead you by pointing you in the wrong fucking direction. I don't know, I didn't design this heap of shit. But anyway, you press L3 and a small little yellow star will appear in the distance, attempting to tell you where you need to be. But should this marker fucking move with you? No, it shouldn't. And most times, it's in the wrong fucking area. Take this mission. You chase away some guy and need to quickly get back to your bike. I press L3 to see where the bike is because the game really doesn't give you any direction at all. So I head in that direction to find that, in reality, the bike is in the opposite way. Words don't express how inept these developers and programmers must have been. How can you fuck up at something as simple as a fucking objective marker? It's usually a stationary object. The one thing I would expect in any game to get right is dead wrong in Ride to Hell. How is this even fucking possible? Let's move on before I have a damn stroke. The collectibles. These come in a couple different varieties. There are paint cans that you can collect that unlock a few different colors for your bikes. You know, the one thing I can actually see while riding in the game. There are also two different sets of playing cards that you can grab. There's a blue set and a red set. The one apparently shows you pictures of the bastards that are present in the game, and the other are the bastards that are responsible for creating it. These cards simply unlock more parts for your bike customization. The ones that you can find while running around aren't too bad to find, but remember that if you miss them on the driving scenes, you'll have to replay that mission. So I had to do some replays because, you know, trophy whore. The voice acting isn't the worst I've ever seen, but damn, it's bad. Mikey is an annoying little brat. The gun dealer sounds like the guy from the Arby's commercials. I'm surprised he never said, "We've got the meats." Jake isn't so awful, which is good since he talks the most, but his attempts at rage or remorse are just plain pathetic. It just sounds stupidly forced. The music of this game is probably the most tolerable feature. No, it's not great by any stretch, but it's palatable. It's repetitive, but it's not immediately mute-worthy. The game is actually somewhat lengthy, clocking in at about 37 missions. These missions don't get completed logically, though. You might have to complete a few different, I guess we can call them mini-missions with different names before one of those 37 missions is ticked off as completed. It makes no sense, but I will give them credit in that in an era where many games last maybe 4 to 6 hours, this game clocks in at about 10 to 12. Unfortunately, this is one of those games where I would have thought less is better. And that's sad, because the story has premise. The whole 60s vibe isn't something that's played around with a lot in games that aren't shooters. Sure, the revenge tale has been played multiple times, but I like how there's a biker mentality in this one. And the game was originally supposed to be an open world affair. That would have been badass. Why did they go away from it? Probably because, from what I've heard, the game was cancelled yet was continuing to be worked on. Probably just to milk any sort of money that was spent on creating this turd, and they just wanted to finish it up to try salvaging the work. In addition, the game was originally supposed to be part of a trilogy. Ride to Hell Route 666 was originally planned on PSN and Xbox Live Arcade. It was apparently going to focus more on the road and less on walking around. The mobile game Ride to Hell Beatdown was announced, but I haven't seen any other information on it. But by the name, I'm assuming that would have been the complete opposite of Route 666. I can say that I'm thankful that these games were never released, although for some reason there is DLC for Retribution, which I'm sad to announce I'm actually kind of tempted to check out because, well, let's face it, I'm a sucker for punishment. Yet I can't check it out because the DLC no longer exists. I scoured the PSN and nothing. Even when I open up the store from the game, it shows an empty page. Wow. How bad can a game be when its freaking lame-ass DLC is pulled? Although who knows, that could have possibly been the best DLC that any game has ever had. I doubt it, but you never know, I guess. So everything I've talked about up until this point was all based on notes I took while myself and Will co-opted this masterpiece. But I didn't hook up my recorder when we were playing it. Think of it as a dry run. So I had to play the game solo when I got back home from my vacation to record all the footage you're currently seeing. Luckily for you, I found out that playing the game a second time, I learned that the game is even worse than I thought, and took another page and a half of notes. So, think of this as Chapter 2 of Ride to Hell Retribution's review. I know, lucky me to play this crap again. So, let's see here. There's a ton of typos in the game. Even from the start, a gun is listed to cost $19.99 with a comma instead of a period. It must be a new currency. And that's not all. I've seen spelling mistakes in the shop screens. During the boxing matches, you're told that your opponent is a cold-blooded killer. What the hell is a cold-blooded killer? I know, they're supposed to be saying cold, and I think they actually do. But coal? Wouldn't that mean hot-blooded killer? Or is it cold coals? I know, I'm dwelling too much on this useless information. I noticed that there's absolutely minimal atmospheric sound effects. There are scenes that just feel unnatural because as the video is playing out, you'd be expecting to hear something in the back. Nope. It's almost like watching something that originally tried to be a silent film, but then realized, hey, people can talk nowadays. There are a few times in the game where you get to shoot a mounted machine gun. This part is fine enough. The head-scratching part is when you realize that every few seconds, Jake stops shooting just so he can taunt his enemies. What the fuck is the point of this? This can easily result in death because, well, you're not fucking shooting. Let me introduce you to this guy right here. He's Private Vanderbilt. Say hi to him now before he dies a minute later. But his death isn't the reason why I'm mentioning him. It's because even though he's a private, he's wearing a colonel's rank right above his name tag. Now, I was in the military for 8 years, but I'm not a historian. But I'm pretty sure a private never had to wear an officer's rank above his chest, or a rank anywhere other than a shoulder or collar, depending on the uniform. I could be wrong. I don't think I am, though. When you're battling in a trailer park, you encounter an exploding trailer that you need to run from. This isn't the first time something like this occurs. Earlier in the game on a farm, you'll be running from a wheat thresher. At least I think that's what it is, but my knowledge on farm machinery isn't exactly the greatest. But anyway, that was easy to run from. This took me a few attempts because look at these physics. Plus, the game doesn't give you enough time to react. It expects you to know that this thing is going to be flung at you and that you need to be pressing down immediately when the cutscene of it blowing up starts. If not, you're probably not going to survive. Again, bullshit. There's a few times where you're riding shotgun to Mac and you're shooting a machine gun. These aiming controls are bad enough when you're moving because the camera jerks around like someone with Parkinson's disease is holding it. Is that joke in good taste? I'm keeping it. But anyway, I've learned later on that when you're stationary with him, it's even fucking worse. How? Fucking how? I did laugh when I died though, because Mac will just drive off into a fence and explode the bike. Even he knows what's involved in here and wants nothing to do with it. And that's the sad thing. The humor comes at points that are supposed to be serious, usually around areas regarding death. I already mentioned that the horribly lackluster rage attacks and Jake's lack of true angry emotions. But let's take this scene here, where Mac dies. Oops, spoiler. Oh, come on, you can't bitch, because you can't say you're going to want to play this game. But anyway, Jake just repeats no a few times, in what should have been a sad scene I freaking laughed at.
No! No! No!
Did I feel bad? Not really, it's just a game. But it really should have been a somber scene. But most definitely wasn't. I talked about texture lag earlier, which makes the final scene with Ellie extremely creepy. But what happens when whole chunks of maps go missing? Take a look here at one of the final missions of the game, where you had to steal a truckload of armaments from the main villain of the game, who happened to take them from Arby's guy. There are literally sections of the map that just never loaded in. There must not have been any QC in this game whatsoever. Finally, you know those playing cards you collect? I managed to snag them all, and went into the screen that shows them, just so I could show you that they exist. Apparently the game wants to slowly show you every set that I got, and it doesn't let you skip this. What's the freaking point of going this slowly? You know what? That's all I can take for Ride to Hell Retribution. It really does feel like one of the worst games ever made. Although I will say that I still believe Sonic 06 to be worse overall. To sum up this lengthy review, Ride to Hell has awfully slippery driving controls, boring combat, average fistfights, and annoying features that tend to frustrate more than help. And I didn't even touch on the really fucked up sex scenes where the characters are completely clothed, because, well, there's enough reviews on that subject alone online, so I don't feel the need to talk about them or show them. If there is anything that you listen to in this review, it should be this. Don't fucking play it. Final score? You probably know this already, but 1 out of 10. I'd give it a 0, but at least the game's logo looks cool. That's worth a sympathy point alone in my book, I guess. And finally, I'm done with Ride to Hell. Retribution. Let's put this in hell where it belongs. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.